Hello everyone, and welcome to the Musescore Café for Wednesday, September 19th, 2018. And today is a very special episode of the Café because we're going to be taking a preview look at Musescore 3, which I want to emphasize is not actually released yet, but we have put out an alpha build, and the alpha build is available for anyone to download and use, and you can try it out. It's not completely ready for real world use, but we are promising that if you create scores with this build, they will continue to be openable in future versions. So there's still some things that might not work right, some things that you might need to change when future builds become available, but at least you don't have to worry anymore that if you create a score in this alpha build that it won't be openable anymore. So anyhow, what I want to do is kind of go through and show you some of the new things that you can expect in Musescore 3. Now, if you've already been trying it out or you've been hearing about it on forums and have specific things that you want to know more about or want to tell me about that you've been playing with and have experienced, by all means, let me know. I will be following the chat. And if I forget, please remind me. Let me just swap over and pop the chat window out to make sure. There we go. Hello. Okay, so I have made some notes to myself about the new features that I want to highlight. And so let me just bring those up for a second so I can be referring to them. The basic tagline that we are using to promote this release is going to be smarter, easier, and faster. And so I want to talk about those things in particular and some specific features along the way. So smarter is really the main reason why this release is such a big deal. As you may know, Musescore 2, we released that back in 2015, and very shortly after that, Werner, the developer, made some fundamental changes to how layout works to make things smarter. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that, but these are really exciting changes, and I want to show you a little bit about it and then talk about why it's so important. So I'm going to actually flip back to Musescore 2 for a moment so you can see some of the problems that Werner was working on solving. So one of them is collisions. So for instance, here I have a note and I have a chord symbol above it, and all is well. However, if I were to transpose that note up an octave, that chord symbol doesn't move. Now there's just a collision. And so when you enter chord symbols on notes above the staff, they're just going to collide. And of course, not just chord symbols. Dynamics collide with notes below the staff. Text elements collide with each other. Articulations collide with text. There's all sorts of collisions that Musescore can't automatically resolve. So that's an important one. And here's another one that some of you might be familiar with. If I want to add a hairpin here, a crescendo, it's going to overlap the dynamic marking. Also, here I have a note below the staff, and if I take this note and I move it an octave above, they're just going to collide. That's just the way it is. So things on one staff will collide with elements in another staff. And then also look over here, you see something else going on where all these accidentals on this chord are actually preventing this note from being next to this note, like it should be. These accidentals are just saying, oh, you can't start a new note until we're done with all those accidentals. That's how I would put that. So let's take a look at how Musescore 3 is going to handle that same score. So let me go back and open it. I believe I put it here. There we go. All right, so the first thing we can see is that last thing that I talked about is fixed, right? These notes are now allowed to overlap those accidentals so that you get a more compact layout, which is great. Then if you want to have more space, you can have it, but you won't have these awkward gaps and things in your music. Now let's look at what happens with some of those specific cases I talked about. Let's take this E up an octave. Boom, the chord symbol moved. Let's take this A up an octave. Boom, we got more space. And let's add a crescendo sign here. There we go. It avoided the dynamic marking. So these are just among, there's a lot of individual optimizations, collision detections, and things like this that are provided in MuseScore 3. Some of them are there and working. Some of them are still being worked on, and so we're hoping to see even further improvement. One that I want to really kind of focus on is what's happening here. These two notes are colliding, but if I take this measure, so now when I take that measure out, the staffs get closer together again. If I paste that note here, you can see it didn't add any additional space here, or at least maybe not as much. Maybe it did a tiny bit. No, it didn't. So it was smart enough to know that this note here isn't really colliding with that note. So in other words, it's not a dumb algorithm that just looks at the lowest thing on the entire system. It's what's called a Skyline algorithm, where it tries to fit the lowest thing here, but in the valleys between the highest things here and so forth. So if it can do that, then it doesn't need the extra space. So that's called a Skyline algorithm, and this is a situation in which that is implemented. There's still more work to do to create that Skyline algorithm for other situations, but this is a situation where you can see something like the Skylines that are still yet to come. So those are some of the layout optimizations that you can expect to see. So let me pop back over to the chat and make sure I'm okay. So obviously you can hear me. That's always good. So cool. So those are some of the things there layout-wise. Let me talk a little bit about why this is important. I mean, some of you are looking at this and probably salivating, oh, wow, I know why that's important. But let me tell you a little more about this. Normally, when you create a score, you might spend some time doing a lot of manual adjustments, and then you to avoid these sorts of collisions. And then you go generate the parts, and you find you have to do those adjustments again, not because MuseScore wasn't smart enough to just keep those adjustments, but because those adjustments won't make sense. For instance, when this note here was here, this is a collision between the top staff and the bottom staff. But if these are different instruments, if this is like a clarinet staff and then that's, I don't know, another clarinet staff, or that's the flute staff or whatever, these notes aren't going to be colliding in the parts. There would be absolutely no reason to have to do anything in the parts about that. And similarly, the gap that was here, that wouldn't have been an issue in parts because these would be just on, this part and this part would just be totally different. So it's very common that the specific manual adjustments you might make in the score don't make sense in the parts. So you're going to have to redo a lot of them anyhow. Well, manual adjustments to fix these problems takes time, and no one wants to spend that kind of time. And of course, some of the other expensive notation programs, the commercial alternatives, Sibelius and Dorico. Oh, I should find out how to pronounce that. Anyone want to tell me? So Dorico is, it's spelt like this, D-O-R-I-C-O. To me, that looks like Dorito, the snack, but with a C instead of a T. So I kind of want to call it Dorico, but it might be pronounced differently. So anyhow, it is a new program coming from Steinberg, or is out now from Steinberg, that has a ton of these sorts of things in it already, and we really want to be able to, compete with that. So that's an important reason. I'm going to talk a little more about some other reasons, but I want to also just address this question. What if I load an old score? Well, this was an old score that I just loaded. That smart layout score was, in fact, created in MuseScore 2. So let me go ahead and save it now with all these collisions. To be honest, so let's see. I don't know what's going to happen. I didn't make any manual adjustments here, so let me save this and now reload it in MuseScore 3. I am going to assume for now that my shortcuts are the same, which is probably not a good assumption. So that's the Start Center, F4, Smart Layout. So let's see what happens if I load it. So this got fixed automatically. That space got fixed automatically. The E7 went up automatically. This went up automatically. So if you leave things at their default settings, they are just going to look better. Now, if you make a bunch of manual adjustments in your MuseScore 2 score, then when you import those to MuseScore 3, I don't know for sure what will happen, and I will say that whatever happens today might not be what happens next month. In other words, there's going to be some controls added, most likely, to make it easy to undo your manual adjustments and kind of reset everything to default layout so you can take advantage of the smart layout more easily. So whatever is going on today, if you want to test loading a 2.0 score, a MuseScore 2 score into MuseScore 3, you can test it out. You can provide your feedback on the forum, but I wouldn't assume that what you see today is how it's going to be forever in terms of what happens when importing an older score. So I was talking about, let me just go back to the chat for a second. I was talking about so this is MuseScore 2, there's 3, the advantages of this smart layout. And I mentioned specifically, well, it just saves time. Well, that's fantastic in itself, but there's actually more to it than that. Imagine you are, as I am, a jazz musician, and you've produced a chart in the key of F, and then later on you decide, hey, I want to do this thing in G. Maybe because you're actually doing it with a singer and they've got a slightly higher voice, or maybe you're producing a version for trumpet and you want a G version. Well, all the manual adjustments that you made on the F version, they may or may not apply to the G version. You know, it's like a step higher. So maybe there wasn't a collision between this note and the chord symbol in the version in F, but in the version in the key of G, maybe now there is. Or maybe there was in F, but then when you transposed to G, or maybe you transposed to D and went down a few steps, and now there's not a collision anymore. So every time you transpose the music, it's going to kind of change things about where collisions are, and you really don't want to have to redo all that work. More significantly than that even is if you think about how people read scores these days. I mean, paper isn't going away, but I know from my personal experience that a whole lot of the musicians that I work with do not read paper scores on the bandstand when they have a choice. They mostly have their tablets, and they're usually using a PDF viewer that's just displaying a PDF file. But there are apps like the Musescore Mobile App that can display your score, and when it displays your score, I'm going to actually bring that up here if I can. When it displays your score, it will, if you want, display it the way, I need to log in again because I need to. It will display your score exactly the way it was going to have printed, but it also has the ability to let you, change the font size of the score, make it bigger, or make other changes to the layout of the thing to fit like the dimensions of your screen. And so because of that, whatever manual adjustments you might have made to optimize things to how you thought it was going to print, those things might not apply anymore once someone views the mobile score. So let's take a look at something here. I'm looking at my score reunion, which you may or may not really be able to see here, but it's displaying it at the exact size, not the size, but the same layout that it would be on paper. It's too small to read. So if I go and hit the plus button here and say I want it bigger, bigger, bigger. Now, the original version had, let me go back to original, sorry. Okay. So I'm not as familiar with the current version of the app. But the original version actually had like the pickup and 3 full measures on the first line. And this actually isn't the original, so this is lying to me. But anyhow, it's, there's, see how many measures are per line there? There's like 4 or 5 measures per line. Every time I make it bigger, now there's only 3 measures on that line, the pickup and 2 measures. It's re-flowing the music. Every time I change the size. Well, that means all the manual adjustments I've made are, no longer applicable necessarily. So the advent of mobile apps for reading music and basically viewing music electronically, this is a huge, huge reason why this smart layout is so important. So anyhow, that's what I wanted to talk about regardless of smart layout, the smartness of MuseScore 3. And yeah, this is really, really exciting. And it's the first improvement, but it's also the biggest. I will absolutely say that this is the reason why it's taken so long. Werner checked in these changes. He committed these changes to do some of this stuff back like literally 4 years ago, I think, but it's still a work in progress, but we're getting there. All right, so a question was, what about multiple objects on a note, say bow markings and fingerings and dynamics? So these are some of the things that are, still kind of a work in progress. Some of this is going to work exactly as you might hope. Some of it might not. So let's see. I'm going to add some staff text. I'm going to add a accent mark. Now those I don't think would have collided anyhow, but let's start. There we go. They are moving out of each other's way. What if I add a bow marking? Now it's already the case that MuseScore 2 did a reasonable job of handling up to like 2 different articulations. It starts to fall apart when you try to do 3, but it also depends on the particular marking. But let's go ahead and add a bowing also. Well, there you go. So you can see it push the staff text up. Now you may or may not like the way it did it. Maybe you wanted the bow marking above the staff text or whatever. So as far as controlling how things are actually resolved, I don't know that there's any control over that or plans to add that. What there is the ability to just disable it. You can disable the automatic placement for any symbol, and then you can drag it and use the arrow keys and use the inspector and do all those things. There's also a control here for stacking order for things that do overlap. Once you do deliberately overlap something, like if I put a graphic behind the staff, you might want to control whether that graphic obscures the staff or lies underneath the staff. So the staff lines either show through the graphic or don't. So the stacking order lets you control things like that. So hopefully that answers that question. Oh, fingerings too. Let's find out what happens if I add a fingering, because I honestly don't know if fingerings are included in the algorithm. Fingerings I know are handled. So the fingering currently doesn't participate in this whole collision resolution, at least not in conjunction with articulations. Let's see if it does in conjunction with the staff text, if I add another staff text here. So it looks like currently fingerings just don't participate in automatic placement in this way, at least not in the collision avoidance. So that's a good question, and feel free to bring that up on forum, and maybe that'll get taken care of before release. So let me go on and talk about some of the other sorts of things in addition to the smart layout that are present, because there are quite a few pretty exciting, I think, new features and other improvements. So one of them is performance. We talked about that MuseScore is going to be faster, and I'm not sure if to what extent this is going to be apparent right now, but here is a fairly large score. This is the 1812 overture that was created for OpenScore. And what happens is if you select any note and then make any change, so I'm in MuseScore 2 right now, if I just change this one note, raise it an octave, say, waiting, there it is. So you saw how long that took? Watch again. On the screen, you'll see when I pressed the key, and then look how long it is. So on the screen, you'll see down here, say Control Down. I'm going to press Control Down, and just kind of count to yourself to see how long. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Wow, that's longer than last time. 10. Yeah, maybe something's even gone wrong here. 7. Okay, last time it only took a few seconds. So this is Musescore 2, and it's basically not handling large scores very well, is the bottom line. I don't know why that's happening. Obviously, see what happens is, and I have to apologize, my system, I got it for portability, I got it for battery life, but it's not the most powerful system in the world. And whenever I'm streaming video, it tends to back up a bit. So yeah, this is not good at all. I don't know if it's actually in the middle of crashing or what, but the first time I did it, it took like about 5 seconds. So I'm just going to put that aside. I'm going to go to Musescore 3 and do the same thing. I'll select that first note and I will press Control up. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so it took about 2 or 3 seconds there. This is longer than I would like, frankly, but it's faster. And the reason it's faster, it's not just small optimizations made to like how fast things are. There's a fundamental difference in how the layout is happening here. In Musescore 2, are we awake yet? We're finally awake. In Musescore 2, every change you make requires Musescore to completely relay out the entire score. So it calculates the position of every single note, every single dynamic, every single marking in this entire score, which is many, many pages long with lots and lots and lots of notes. I'm using my touchpad, by the way, Shift plus scroll wheel, or 2-finger swipe actually. So Shift, 2-finger swipe, in case you're not familiar with how to be scrolling. So this score is enormous, really. And that is why it hung up so badly when I made that change. So if you work with scores that big, let's see if I can get it to do something a little more reasonable. I'm going to count this again. 1. Oops, I thought I pressed the button, but it didn't show up. So let me do it again. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so that time was faster, and I'm not sure why. Anyhow, and now this one's hanging because it's really all about my streaming video. The basic idea, though, is that in Musescore 2, every time you make a change, it recalculates everything for the entire score. In Musescore 3, this doesn't happen. It figures out how much of your score actually needs to change. Let me close the inspector for a second. So when I change that note, let's take a look at this measure here to see if it changed. Yeah, I wouldn't have expected it to. Changing this note didn't affect how many measures fit on this system. So basically, this system needed to be relayed out. You know, this measure may have changed width slightly, and so some positions within the system may have changed. But beyond that, nothing else really changed. So in Musescore 3, it's smart enough to know not to relay out everything in the score. It doesn't have to recalculate the position of every single note, every single dynamic. It only has to do this measure or this system or however much it thinks has changed. If there's a ripple effect and a change I made here pushes a measure to the next system, then it'll relay out the next system too. It does it intelligently, but it does it really intelligently where it only lays out what is needed. And so for large scores, in principle, this makes things a lot faster. So that's the performance aspect of what's going on here. Then there's also, so let's see, you don't need style settings. Yes, there's still style settings that will set default positions of things, because it's still the case that when I first add a staff text, something has to determine what that position is. However, so it is now, oops, that's Musescore 2. I'm going to confuse myself a lot, I can tell. If I go to Musescore 3 and do the same thing, select a note, there is still going to be a style setting that controls the default location of that staff text. It's just that now, if I add an accent marking, okay, my streaming video, I think I'm just going to close that Tchaikovsky score. It's also probably the case that the fact that this Tchaikovsky score was created in Musescore 2, my guess is that in itself probably causes some performance issues. That's just a guess. I don't really know that for a fact, but let me close. Whoa, what did I close? Close something else, I guess. But let's, oh, did I? Okay, what happened is it crashed. So Musescore 3 crashed when I tried to close that score. Yeah, crashes are going to happen. It is still just an alpha build, and that was a very large score with a lot going on in it, so I'm not panicking. Anyhow, do I want to restore the session? I do, except for the Tchaikovsky, and I don't want to get that again. So I will just come here. I would love it if it would show me smart layout that I had loaded, but okay, so see this artifact here? When I just resized the screen, this black area, this is actually, I think, due to that smart layout only relaying out what was needed, and that kind of didn't work properly. So if you ever see this happen, just do Control-A to select all. That'll force the entire score to be relayed out, and then you'll get to see what you need to see. So I forgot the question I was answering. Oh yeah, it had to do with, what am I doing? Had to do with adding style, well, whether style settings are needed. So the default position of that staff text was going to be a little lower, but it's adding that accent mark, right? That pushed it up. Well, the default position is a function of a style setting. So the style settings have moved to the format menu. So now there's format, style, and the whole idea of text style, it's not that it's gone away, it's that it's sort of merged into the general style and text properties. It's being rethought how this all works. So now for staff text, you can see, and this is actually one of the next features I was going to talk about anyhow. With staff text before, you just had one default position. It was either above or below the staff, depending on what position you set. Now you can set independent positions for above or below. So you can say when it's above the staff, I want it to be here. When it's below the staff, I want it to be here. And then there's also a setting to control the minimum distance for the auto placement. In other words, how far away, when the collision is detected, how far away from the colliding element is this thing going to have to move. And then this is a default. Do you default to above or below? So these are the settings that are now available for staff text as far as the position goes. So you can still set these positions, but now it's really nice because you can take this staff text and just press X, just like other things, and it will flip from above or below according to those staff text settings, those style settings. So if you want it when it's above to be really close to the staff, when it's below to be much further below, which for instance for dynamics, that's probably what I would want. Dynamics below the staff should be around here, but dynamics above the staff are used for vocal music, and traditionally they would probably be closer to the top of the staff than they would be to the bottom of the staff. At least that's my perception. Anyhow, you're going to have that option now to have and then if you want to flip a dynamic above the staff, it's just going to be as simple as selecting it and pressing X. So let's take a look at that. So if I press this and press X, now it's above. And it is actually a little closer, you can see. And if you want it closer still, I should be able to go, I guess style is not in the right-click menu there. But if I go here and say, and it probably should be, I'd like to see it there. Position above, make it only be -1. Then now it's closer by default. But below, it's still far below. So now you can easily flip things there. So you may have noticed that The old text style had not just position settings, but all the font settings and all that. Well, the new style settings here that kind of merge, I said, between text style and the old general style, that's not the case anymore. It's just about position for our text style in the style menu. Instead, the inspector has picked up all of these other options that used to require you to go to the text style or text properties menu and remember which was which. Now, all of this is merged into the inspector. There's still a concept of a text style. I can still select this text element and assign it a different style. And now there's a style called expression, which is cool because expression is supposed to be italics. We've never had that before, and it's a silly thing that's been missing for a long time, but now it's there. Also, if you go to the text palette, help me, here it is. Expression text is just right there as a full-fledged element. So you can take any text element and give it different types of styles just like you could before. So all of that still works more or less the way it did before in terms of functionality, but it's all kind of centralized into the inspector now. So that should really simplify things and also provide some additional capabilities too. Some of this stuff is still a little bit in flux, so by all means play with it and let us know your thoughts. Let's see what happens if I flip this dynamic above. See, it pushed the expression a little higher to avoid the collision. So the inspector really brings together some of the stuff that used to be in the style menu and some of the stuff that used to be in a text properties dialog. A number of other things that used to be in dialogues, actually that's not what I meant. I want to do a Volta because I think that's another one that is. If I go to lines and add myself a Volta and select it, yeah, all the things that used to be in, you'd have to right click it and go to line properties. Now all those settings are right here in the inspector, including the actual Volta settings. So you don't, there's just a simplification to the interface. Of course, this is a big complicated dialogue here, but it's all the same place. And now this is the one thing that you're going to deal with mostly instead of having this kind of convoluted assortment of other things. Well, let me move on and show a few other things. So some of the other things that are designed to make things easier is there is now what's called the timeline. And in order to give you any sense of why this might be a thing, let me show you a score that has some stuff going on in it. So this score has got whatever it's got, several pages of stuff. If I then go to view timeline, it's going to show me a representation of my score. It's going to show me any key signature changes, any time signature changes, which this one doesn't happen to have, but also all the places where there's double bars or repeats. It's going to show me all the rehearsal marks and so forth. It's going to show me the DS's and fines if there were any of those, as well as actually showing me the measure indications. And then you can just click to go somewhere. So as far as a way of navigating your score, this is really going to simplify things. Oh, also scrolling down, you can see your list of instruments. At least I thought I saw that. I see it. Well, I saw it. I see violin 1, I see violin 2. I know there's more instruments than that. Maybe there's a glitch in how it's displaying, or I just need to, oh, I see it scrolling. My thing is the little pop-up that shows my key presses is kind of getting in my way here, but I can scroll it here. It's scrolling the instruments just within this little area here. So I don't know what actually happens if I click the piano. It's not showing me the piano, but anyhow, it's showing me the different instruments that are available. So the timeline is going to be a really useful way of navigating your score with more information than the old Navigator did. The Navigator just showed you a physical representation of the page. but it was too small to really see where you were in terms of where the rehearsal marks were. If you wanted to go to letter D in your score, the navigator didn't really help. There was a fine facility to just go to letter D, but maybe you couldn't remember what D is. Now I remember letter C is the start of the repeated section, and that's great. I can just click my letter C, and boom, I'm at my repeated section. So the timeline is one new feature. Another new feature that I haven't actually even attempted to fire up yet, you're going to witness me do this for the first time, is the Transcribe Assistant. So let me close this guy. The Transcribe Assistant, okay, I haven't a clue how to use this thing, so I apologize for that. But I can tell you what the theory is. The theory is that it is something that is going to show you, I don't want to say more than I know, but it has to do with if you have a PDF file that you are basically trying to copy that music into MuseScore, this is going to help with that process. No, it's not some magic import your PDF file for you. It's just designed to kind of help show you where you are in the music and to kind of align things. So at some point in the future, I'm going to learn how to use this thing and show that off. But it is a thing that exists. You can also customize toolbars now. So Transcribing Assistant, I guess that's what this is, but yeah, I don't know how to use it, so I'm just going to close it. So to actually customize the toolbar, I saw how that worked before, but customize toolbars. Here we go. So now you can actually control which buttons are on your toolbar. So for instance, if you're not going to use the new quadruple dot button, then you can remove it, which I think I might want to do because I don't even like double dots. I'm certainly not going to use a triple dot or a quadruple dot. So I would just as soon, advanced workspace is currently not changeable. I think I have to create a custom one, or maybe I can add to the basic toolbar. Anyhow, you can customize the toolbars. And another sort of thing that's designed to make life easier, I'm entering a C major scale. So did I enter a C major scale? No, I screwed things up. Well, first of all, I got 2 notes out of order. This is already the case in MuseScore 2, that while you're in note input mode, if you have 2 notes of the same duration, but they're in the wrong order, shift left, shift right just swaps them. They have to be the same duration. You have to be in note input mode. But what if I just totally forgot to enter a note in between there? Well, right now I can say Control G. Nope, that's not it. There is a command to insert, Control Shift maybe, Control Shift G. Yeah, there we go. I just inserted a note there. You see that? Now this measure has 5 beats in it. This is going to be great if you're trying to enter music, that's not meant to have a time signature. If you're notating, Renaissance, like chant music or hymn, not hymn, well, you know what I mean, liturgical music that's not based on meter. So you can just Control Shift letter will insert a note and literally add another beat to that measure. Similarly, you can select a note or a few notes, and I believe it's Control Delete. Yep, Control Delete just deletes those. And this little icon shows up to let you know that this is a modified measure. In other words, this measure has a minus sign, tells me it has fewer beats in it than it should. As soon as I add a beat, now that icon goes away. If I add another beat, now it's a plus icon, indicating that this measure now has more beats. This measure has more beats than the time signature. So for creating music that isn't based on meter, this is going to hopefully be helpful. I mean, we already had commands under the edit menu at least that's where they used to be. I think these commands might not be present anymore because of this, but they were join and split commands to join and split measures. But now you can just do this on a beat by beat basis. So there's probably not any need for those commands anymore, which were a little, cruder. So those are some of the really big things So inspector, we can change properties of individual selected text, changed globally. Yeah, so let me enter another staff text here, and another one here. So the position of those was, again, under Format, Style, Staff Text. And here's where I can change the default position for things. I could make it be higher above the staff. There, now it's higher above. There's before, there's now. But as far as changing the actual font and all, what if I wanted it to be boldface? Let's see, I'm going to select that thing, make it boldface, and then this drop down here, I think it's this drop down, set as style. There you go. That is now how you can take any changes you have made to one text element and say, I want that to apply basically to all of the text elements. I want it to be the default style now for staff text. Notice it didn't affect the one I had already customized, but it sets the default now so that if I add another staff text, it will also show up bold. So basically all these little buttons next to things. So if I wanted to change the default to be a different font, if I wanted to change it to be whatever this guy is, I could make that be the default. And now all my staff texts become that default. So that's how you can still edit the style defaults. So it's the way you do things is changing a bit regarding text styling, but the capabilities should all be there. And furthermore, it's actually a little more, because now it used to be an all or nothing thing. When you defined a text style, you had to define everything for it. Now you can just say, you know, I want to just change the font. I don't want to change the size. I don't want to change anything else. I just want to change the font and make that be the new default. So now you can do those changes individually. And there's a few other interesting new capabilities that this brings about, but mostly it just makes it more flexible. So I want to kind of do a brief rundown of some of the other individual features. These are kind of the big global things that I've showed you, but there's more to see. One of them has to do with hiding of empty staves. Right now in MuseScore 2, you can either hide empty staves throughout the whole score or not at all. There's an option to say don't do it on the first system. And any given staff, it's either eligible for hiding or it's not. Well, now there's a few additional options here. There's actually not as many as I'm hoping will be there eventually, but we can set this particular staff to always hide when empty. So now the violin staff disappeared because it is set to hide when empty, violin 1. But violin 2 is not set to hide when empty. So it's only going to hide if I actually turn on hide empty staves. But I've told violin 1 to just always hide when empty. So it shows up only here. So that's a way you can have just one staff that appears and disappears on command without having to turn on hide empty staves. So that's actually a feature that I implemented. Did I? I don't want to take credit. I'm pretty sure. Yes, I'm virtually positive I implemented that one. And I'm really going to be happy to see that because it's going to come in handy. Another kind of cool thing that kind of goes along with that is I'm going to enter something into this violin 2 staff right here. And I am now going to go to its staff properties, and I'm going to enable the cutaway option and watch what happens to it. Boom. So this used to be possible to get this effect by going around and you'd have to turn on hide empty staves. You have to hide measures individually, but now it is just turning on the cutaway option. And probably I also want to turn on to force it to hide when empty, so that on the first system there is no violin 2 staff. On the second system is just that measure. What is that useful for? Well, you probably can think of places where this would be useful. Something called an oscilla, where you show alternate, like alternate ways of playing a measure, if you want to write out an ornament, or just for, there's certain ways of doing scores, modern scores. I say modern, the last 100 years people have been using this as a method of introducing, if an instrument comes in partway through a piece, to just have it do this and not have to show all of its empty measures. So anyhow, this is now as simple as just setting that cutaway option. It occurs to me, I want to undo all these changes. I opened a score that I don't want to modify. So I am going to, before I do anything more, save as on this guy and make sure I give it a distinctive name so I don't accidentally mess anything up. All right, so here's another cool thing. What if the violin part has multiple voices? Because you've rarely written two different violins on the same staff instead of putting them on separate staves. In Musescore too, I mean, that's something that's very often done in orchestral music for the winds, to put the flute 1 and flute 2 on the same staff. Well, when you're generating parts now, there will be the option to say, let's see if I remember how to do this. I'm going to say new, and in that part, I'm going to give it the name violin 1 top, and I'm going to tell it to only include voice 1. There's probably a better way to do it than what I just did. And then I'm going to create another part, call it violin 1 bottom, and it's going to be violin 1 just the second voice. So if I did this right, I have two new parts. Violin 1 has just that note, and this one has just that note. I probably did something wrong in doing it, but I think you get the idea. And obviously the layout is severely messed up. So again, this is an alpha release, no need to panic. But the point is, there is now the ability to separate out parts by voice. So that's going to be really useful for people writing orchestral music. A couple of other changes that are worth pointing out is there is now a new type of break called don't break. Don't break says, no matter what happens, please keep these two measures together. And then even if, let me insert some more measures here. I'm just going to start inserting measures. And let me close the inspector so you can see what's happening. I'll make the view a little smaller. As I insert measures, watch what happens. I'm inserting. At some point, boom, there we go. It didn't just move one measure to the next system, it moved them both. Now, why is there space at the end of that system? I couldn't tell you. That could be a bug. It could be an intended side effect of the don't break element. I honestly don't know. I wonder if I put a regular line break there, it works. But how about if I don't do it with this measure? Well, whatever. That's the don't break. The other thing I want to show you, I just want to see what happens if I had a don't break after the fact. Yeah, it seems to also force this to not go to the end of the margin, which could be a good thing. I don't know. Maybe that is a deliberate thing. There's also this really cool new thing. We've always had staff spacers that allow you to create extra space between systems. And as you've seen, it is no longer as necessary for that, because if I add some text, if I add a note here and it starts colliding with what's above, it automatically is creating more space for me. So it's not very often that you're going to need those staff spacers anymore. But in the times you do, they're still there. But what there also is now is this fixed spacer. Check this out. It never used to be possible to have some staves with less space between them than others. You could do that globally by using the extra distance above staff setting for a staff to say, to make the violin, like in an orchestral score, you could separate the strings from the percussion or separate the woodwinds from the brass by putting extra space above the top brass staff or extra space above the top string staff. And you could use that extra space to get extra space between staves, or you could actually reduce it. But you couldn't just say, just right here and nowhere else in the entire score, just on this one line of this one system. So anyhow, now you can do that. You can make some staves be closer together than others. Another new feature is the staff type change element. So what have I just done? I've added this element. It calls it's on the text palette, but I believe this is not a real text element. I have to believe that if I say show unprintable, turn off, it goes away, because it's more like those break elements. It's not really text, so probably this shouldn't be in that palette. What is it? Well, let me bring up the inspector again. What it is it lets you actually change staff type mid-score. We've had the ability to change instrument mid-score using the change instrument element, but now you can change other things, like you could say small, and now the staff changes from full size to small mid-score. Or you can change whether bar lines. Well, you could if it worked. That one doesn't seem to work. And appears to crash the program. Okay, so never mind that one. Okay, see you later. Nice having you here. So yeah, that just crashed MuseScore again. So, but anyhow, you did get to see that work. You got to see the staff change from large to small. Really, there's only, when I'm looking over the things that I wanted to show you, there's only two things that I haven't shown you. So let me show those as well. I'm sure there's other like miscellaneous new features here and there that I don't know about or that I saw, but I was like, that's minor. I want to show you a lead sheet, and I want to show you a lead sheet so I can show you a very cool new thing that a lot of you are probably going to like. Whoa, okay, so that's that's a MuseScore 2 lead sheet that obviously did not come through correctly. So I'm not going to show you that lead sheet. Not sure why that happened, because I brought in other ones and they worked fine. But let's just enter some notes. So we've always had, actually I should use the Jazz lead sheet template. I don't know if that thing works. We've always had the Muse Jazz font that you can use for your text in your scores. And if you use the Jazz lead sheet template, which assuming it still works, will have my text be in the Muse. And when you open a new score, for some reason it doesn't actually show up by default. I mean, you have to click on its tab. I consider that a bug. So I created that from the Jazz from that template, and it's not doing the thing. But if I set this to use Jazz text, there we go. And if I create a chord symbol here, so it's not correctly setting up things from that template. So that appears to be something that's not quite working right yet, but that's okay. I'm just going to go make a couple things here. I promise if you do much Jazz, you're gonna be very happy when you see what this does. I will increase the size here and make that my style default, and I'm going to enter some notes. So we've always had, and I'll enter some text. And again, so we've always had this Jazz text style, and it was useful for text and chord symbols and so forth. But the notes themselves were just plain notes. What do I mean by plain notes? I mean they're the same font as anyone else. But if you go to Format, Style, and it's right here, under Musical Symbols font, Muse Jazz is now available as an option. And now we have the actual notes and clefs and other symbols in our score now have a handwritten appearance as well. So a lot of jazz musicians, those of you who aren't jazz musicians are looking at that probably saying, why would anyone want that? Trust me, in the jazz world, handwritten charts have been such a big thing for so long that people are really accustomed to them, and even when using notation programs, they will go out of their way to get a handwritten look. Now, personally, I find this very useful for chord symbols, mostly just to make them large enough, bold enough, and narrow enough for how tall they are. There's particular aspects of chord symbols that, make them work well that most handwritten fonts get pretty well. At least handwritten fonts designed for chord symbols do a good job of. So I've always liked using the handwritten font for chord symbols. I haven't cared so much about the notation, but I have to say this does look pretty good to me, and jazz musicians are really, really going to like that. And the last thing I wanted to show you here is if I go to my Different Worlds score again, I just want to show you another feature that I actually implemented, and that's system dividers. So here's my score, and it actually has 2 systems per page, which is really hard to tell, but there's the end of the first system, and there's the end of the start of the next. Actually, I should make the font size a little bit smaller so that there's a little more space between systems to make my point here. If I then go to Format, Style, System, I can enable dividers. I can put them on the left or the right or both. There you go. Now I have dividers between my system just like that. This symbol existed in MuseScore before, but you had to insert it manually, and then anytime the system layout changed, you'd have to redo it. So that's a kind of small but important to some people feature. There's also any number of new symbols within palettes. If I go to the articulations palette, there's some different fermatas. This guy is new. I think these symbols are new. Under ornaments, ornaments is now separated out into its own palette. Breaths has a few new symbols. I mean, there's just new symbols here and there. But really the big deals are the things that I've showed you. So this has been kind of a longer than usual Café session because there was so much to talk about. But I think I've hit on all the main things that I was hoping to hit on that hopefully gives you an idea of how many exciting things there are to come in MuseScore 3. So you can go to the MuseScore website, go to musescore.org and download a nightly build and start playing with these features. And as I said, obviously things don't necessarily all work correctly yet, but if you start creating scores now, they will work. As these bugs get fixed, you can keep working on your score, and then things will just get better and better until release. Now, when it's released, you're all wondering. The answer in the open source world is always when it's ready. So I can't say when. But you look at this, you can see, wow, some things really work well, some things really don't, and there's some basic things that need fixing, but things are moving along. That's all I can say. So hopefully sometime soon we will be seeing an actual, maybe we'll see a beta release that is going to be pushed out for wider testing, and then hopefully a final MuseScore 3 release that will incorporate all these features and more. So hopefully this gets you excited about MuseScore 3. Maybe you guys want to start downloading it and playing with it yourself. Just go to musescore.org, click download software, scroll down to where you see the nightly builds, and download a master build, or maybe it'll say MuseScore 3 Alpha. Either way, you don't want a 2.3 or anything like that. You'll want one that says MuseScore 3, or that says Master, or that says Alpha. Any of those builds will allow you to start playing with MuseScore 3 yourself and get a sense of what it can do. And then by all means, when you encounter bugs, report them to us so we can fix them. With that, I'm going to get ready to sign off. I want to give you a heads up that next week's topic is probably going to be about the online course I'm developing. I've really spent much of the last year developing an online course based on my book, Mastering MuseScore. This online course is going to be it's going to be just as comprehensive, just as thorough, but it's going to teach you how to MuseScore, how to use MuseScore by a series of video lessons. So I'm really excited by it, and I'm just putting the finishing touches on it right now. So I hope to be showing it off to you next week. So with that, I will one last check, make sure I don't have any pending questions. With that, I will indeed sign off and see you next week.